Well, Dinga, first of all, thank you very much for coming here. We had the opportunity to talk a couple of years ago, but there was something going on out there, I heard, and you couldn't come to Bilbao. So it's a pleasure having you here this year.
My pleasure. I mean, I've been last time I've been following the event through a little screen, so it's nice to be here and see real people.
To begin with, I make this question a lot, but I think it's always interesting. For people in our generation, there wasn't a path to games. All these young people can go study the games development and then join a game development studio. How did you end up in games? Because there's always an interesting story.
So in my case, I was 21, not doing anything with my life, just sports and parties and playing video games. And I had a kid. So that made me that gave me a good reason to figure my life out, you know. So I needed to do something, so I started with the dream that I thought was impossible, and I said, okay, I'll try the thing that I would love the most in the world, and then if that doesn't work, I will go to the next thing, and to the next thing, and to the next thing. And somehow it worked. So I started by applying for, so I started by trying to do a school. It was the very first, actually it was the second year for the first school of game design in Paris. It was so there was not even one person who got out of this school when I tried, but it was super expensive. My parents didn't have the money for the 2 years, so I made only 1 year. And then I said, okay, that's not for me then, too bad. And then found the courage to still apply for a QA job. So I tested some mobile games. And then another internship, then an internship for a game design job, somehow got the job, and then a real job.
I think you are the only person I have met in the industry that has gone from QA to management. Is there any, or are there any particular lessons that you've learned from your initial positions that make sense now and that you still keep?
So first of all, fun fact, it might be an Arkane thing because Harvey started in QA as well, Harvey Smith.
That's true. I have forgot that. So you're not the only one, but the second one.
I'm the second Arkane. At least in the company, I'm the second. No, I mean, I can imagine that happening because at the time, getting a job in QA was the best way to enter if you're not a programmer or an artist or a very talented writer. If you didn't have those very specialized skills, I don't know how you would, there was very random ways to enter a company. So for someone who wants to be a designer, at the time, yes, QA was good because you could make your play experience valuable. You could say, hey, I play a ton of games. And that was a valuable skill to be able to be a good tester. Not the only skill, but a valuable skill to be a good tester. So actually, I know quite a few. Actually, he's not manager of the studio, but John Johannes, who made Hi-Fi Rush, director of Hi-Fi Rush and Evil Within 2, randomly, while he was in a linguistic trip in Japan, saw an announcement, do you like video games? I like video games. So he just called and went there, and they offered him a QA job, and Shinji Mikami thought he was very talented, so he let him direct Evil Within 2, and now he has been directing Hi-Fi Rush. So it still happens. It still happens from QA to direction.
I remember a Twitter thread you did a while ago talking about the games that drove you to games. I think it was Might and Magic, Thief. What do they have in common? The ability to give you freedom to be your own person in a different world, maybe?
Yeah, I think there is the well, first of all, if I'm looking at what I really loved in games when I was a kid and before I started to, really formalize it in my head why I loved it, it was indeed traveling in a way, traveling to this world, traveling to this story, meeting these characters. So it was the same pleasure that I found in books or movies, but books are more interactive in a way than movies because your imagination works. Your imagination made me imagine what the Moria mines looked like in Lord of the Rings before, because Steve Jackson didn't make his movie, and I had a version without the illustrations, so it was only in my head. So there was an active participation to building the world, and video games were making me participate in a different way in those stories. And then I also started playing tabletop role-playing games, which is also a different way of interacting with a world, with a story, with some game mechanics. This freedom. And those games, Ultima Underworld, what we call now the immersive sims, some role-playing games, they were the closest thing to this experience of very interactive, this very interactive experience with the system and the setting that you have when you're playing D&D with your friends around the table. It is this, can I do this? And the system responds to you and say, well, yeah, here is the consequence, though.
And let's see what happens, yeah.
Yeah, let's see what happens. And the fun of that in something like, again, Ultima Underworld, can I take the skull and throw it at the spider? What happens, That's very playful. I mean, and that fascinated me, yes. That's the thing I like interacting with a system, interacting with a story, and sometimes have my expectations met. Oh, it happened. Exactly what I expected happened. And more often than not, and that's also the most fun, something different happens than what I was expecting, but it makes sense, and it's fun, and it's playful, and it feels like I have this dialogue there is this dialogue between me and the software, between me and the game, to an extent. And yes, that's something I really love.
It's funny you mentioned tabletop role-playing games. Many years ago, in this same scenario, somebody told me, I played tabletop RPG Dungeons & Dragons. It blew my mind away at the possibilities, and I've been trying to recreate that feeling in my game since then. And it was War Inspector. So it makes sense that somebody
he
who's
walked at Wizard of the
picking
Coast
the
even,
torch of that. So let's talk about immersive sims, since we're talking about freedom in games. Talking about Dishonored in particular, if I'm not mistaken, the first immersive sim you worked in. What are the specific quirks of that genre from your point of view? Because it's systems upon systems upon systems. And I can't wrap my mind around designing that.
Very vast topic.
Narrowing it down a little bit, when you approach that from the get-go, what's the core of, we need to recreate this, or we need this experience? How do you pinpoint that?
Yeah, that's the thing. It's a very quirky design philosophy. Like, it's all about the quirks. That's the interesting thing. So I'd say, and that's the thing. It's like, not sure whether to approach it from the very theoretic or the very concrete, but I will do a bit of both. Immersive sims, they fail or succeed because of what we call the possibility space. Like, you create, every game is a magic circle. And for an immersive sim, you try to create a very large magic circle with a lot of things that are possible. And that's where, that's one of the ways it starts. There is this, and there is the fact that immersive sims are not perfect simulation. They are stylized simulation. That's very important. That's why the term immersive is important compared, associated to sim. It's not a sim. It's not made to recreate reality and be the most accurate recreation of reality. It is stylized. The same way, if you're doing a stylized portrait of someone, you will select some lines and some, shapes, and that will make your stylized drawing, right? And it's the same thing. I would say the type of stylization and the specifics of that stylization will depend on what, at Arkane at least, we like to approach as the power fantasy. what are you doing in this possibility space? Because we make games that are inherently action games. We don't make like, again, it's not about just experimenting with story and experimenting with system. It's about action and, So there is this power fantasy of what is it. And in the case of Dishonored, on paper, the power fantasy was being a supernatural assassin in a steampunk city. And from this one sentence, that starts to narrow both the possibility space, which is your sheet of paper, and the stylization elements. Because, for example, let's take AI. If you make an AI that is too powerful and very lifelike, like everything that someone might notice in their vision field and senses, it will make the game extremely hard, possibly extremely boring. So you have to stylize that. You have to give this impression that those characters are smart, they are looking for you, etc. Because you're an assassin. An assassin is one person against the entire world, in a way. That's what Corvo is, like an entire oppressive regime. One guy, So of course he's not going to just rush in. You in the beginning of the game, there is 4 guys with swords and guns. You're probably dead unless you're incredibly skilled. So that is what, the thematic, the power fantasy is what will drive the simulation. Now look at another game that actually Dishonored is inspired of, which is Thief. Thief, the power fantasy was not of a supernatural assassin. It was of being a thief.
And fragile, quite fragile.
Yes, a thief in a medieval world. So definitely the player is way more fragile. The AI is much less forgiving. The tools are very different, and stealth becomes, if not the only, clearly the dominant strategy. But supernatural assassin, like again, assassin is a wider fantasy than thief, right? The Terminator is an assassin, and it's a robot, like almost indestructible, but it's an assassin. The main character in the Kill Bill movie is an assassin. Doesn't use stealth a lot, So of course we wanted to have to say, okay, if I want to be that type of assassin, if I want to be the assassin that stays afar and snipes, if I want to be the assassin that enters the room, kicks the door in, and slices everyone in ribbons. So now you're starting to get, so probably my mechanics, my story need to be around all those things, because again, supernatural assassin that gives, but I need the tools now. So supernatural assassin in a steampunk city. So that means that I will have access to some type of technology. So immediately, you see, the context starts to guide the stylization, starts to guide the possibility space, and the game itself starts to answer the questions, not the developers. When someone has an idea and say, hey, what if we, like let's say someone said, let's add a jetpack. Well, is this really what an assassin would use, a jetpack? Yeah, well, Boba Fett kind of uses a jetpack, but is he an assassin? No, he's a bounty hunter, right? So, well, maybe I can imagine an assassin using that, but does that work with steampunk? Maybe. Like, I'm not saying it wouldn't work, but definitely that's a more difficult case to make than, you're in a world inspired by England at the time of the plague. Let's have a power that allows you to summon rats, because plague rats, and rats can eat bodies, so they make bodies disappear. Oh, that's stealthy. But it's also very chaotic because it makes noise. But if you're hidden and you use the power, I don't want to reveal the location of the player, make a big noise when you cast it, because otherwise it cannot be used for stealth. It cannot be used to hide the body at a distance. So see, the context of I'm an assassin, I'm alone against an empire, I'm in a steampunk city at the time of the plague, etc., etc. There is supernatural elements. That starts to answer a lot of your questions and guiding a lot of your choices mechanically, narratively, and all that has to be coherent. So I remember when arriving on the project, it was, and towards the end of pre-production of Dishonored, and there was a lot of elements that were here as a promise, and then you had to make them fun and to make them actually real, not just proof of concept. And definitely, extremely challenging, but also extremely rewarding, because you can work, interestingly, going back to role-playing games, you can kind of work like a game, dungeon master, because there is a set of rules and there is a set of narrative context that basically guide ideas and guide how you will tune the mechanics, how you will express a concept. So it's really interesting. And the other thing I will say about one of the quirks is, and one of the difficulties, clearly you can see in what I said that it's a lot of things interconnected. And they all need to make a coherent whole, because otherwise, the possibility space can be broken. The stylization can be broken. Like, it's not what you wanted anymore. So it is very fragile in a sense, and during development, it's constantly breaking. Next version, the AI is way too strong. The game is way too hard. I don't feel like a badass assassin anymore. Next version, the lighting is too bright, so I don't have the feeling that I can stay hidden. Next version, Corvo does very strongly each time he climbs, so I have the impression that people can see me. Like, a lot of very small details can happen, and in a team where everyone is not very connected, across disciplines, very on board with the vision, it can go very bad very fast, because it has, if for the game to be coherent and harmonious, the team needs to be also harmonious, and that's not always easy, video games in general, but well.
When you moved on to the sequel, you have to do everything bigger and better when you're doing a sequel. It was a risk overcomplicating things in Dishonored 2?
Again, it was, I think the way Harvey, the creative director, put that on paper, the mission statement for Dishonored 2 was the sequel to Dishonored, better in every way. That was the goal. Oh, yeah,
thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. And that was a bit scary. But at the same time, it helps, because it means that if it is overly complicated, then it is not better in every way. So actually, during the development of Dishonored 2, there was a lot of crazy, cool ideas that we actually left on the cutting board because it was one more thing. Like, Harvey had this sentence, yeah, but that sounds like one more thing. Even with brilliant ideas, even with his own ideas sometimes, he would say, this sounds like one more thing, we should cut it, we should remove it. Because you do not want to get to that place of... So let's give you an example. We have two characters. We have Corvo and Emily, and they both have their set of powers. So there is a version of that game, possibly, where we put all those powers in the same first playthrough. But we thought that it would be choice paralysis, actually. And I think it's better to have the two different power sets separated until you finish the game, and then you go from New Game Plus. And when you go in New Game Plus, now you understand the game enough that you can add all those mechanics and layers on top of each other and still feel, in
control.
So, yeah, in control, and it's not overwhelming, and et cetera, et cetera. And it feels earned, like it almost feels like you're breaking the game by doing so, which is fine. It's your game, you bought it. If you want to break it, that's fine. That's why we were talking about cheats at lunch. But I think that the way we avoided putting too much is being, again, very focused on the experience. And the other reason is we are not a 1,000-person studios, so we cannot there is just a limit to the amount of things we can do at a time. So, and by choice, we are not a 1,000 people studio. We want to keep this size because it challenges us. It allows us to still, feel like craftsmen, like you're crafting something. You're not mass producing something. Not that there is anything wrong with that, but that's our choice. And because we were the number that we were on Dishonored 2, there is just a limit to the amount of stuff you can add to your game at the same time. And that was also the reality check. The reality check. Better in every way, sure, but it ships.
In Dishonored 2, there's this level, the Clockwork Mansion, famous level, celebrated as one of the finest examples of game design of the century. Well, that's my opinion, at least. But I can only imagine that from the point of view of a producer or a manager, that's the first answer I needed. Must have been kind of a nightmare, right? Because I guess there was so many creative inputs for pulling in every direction.
Yeah, something like the Clockwork Mansion only exists because you have the company culture that allows for something crazy like that to exist. Honestly, on paper,
made no sense at all. No?
Don't do it. Don't do it. But if you have, and when I say company culture, it is not necessarily about because actually I was for 1 year executive producer on Dishonored 2, so I was one of the people. I was the guy to whom some team members came, and said, "Well, that level, are you sure? You sure?" So it was a bit.
So we owe it to you.
No, not only to me. That's my point. That's the point I was going to make, actually.
Okay.
Because Harvey can have said, "I want it." The level design director, Christophe Carrier, could have said, "I want it." Me, at the time, executive producer, could have said, "I want it." But if the team, doesn't believe that it's possible, they will find the good reasons and they will convince you that you should not do it. It is indeed a huge investment of resources, but you need programmers, you need artists, you need designers that believe that it's possible, that make it a passion project, something they want to be proud of in 10 years. You need to have this energy in the team. Otherwise, one guy saying, "I think it's worth it," can lead a team to its destruction. Actually, you can destroy entire project because one guy was too stubborn and didn't want to hear reason when the entire team said, "Do not do it." So in this case, it was a balancing act of people came with the difficulties, and what we tried to do, I was executive producer for a while, and then I came back to being lead designer. In both those positions, it is, okay, thanks for the challenge. What can we do? What is the timeline where this works? What does that look like? The universe where this is possible. And then people will start to stop looking at the concrete stuff that is blocking, but the in the ideal situation, maybe we would approach it like this, like that. What is preventing you to do that? How can we remove that difficulty from you? How can we smooth it out, etc., etc.? So it is 100% a team effort. And of course, you need some champions, like the level designer for that level, Dana Nightingale, worked tirelessly on it. David Di Giacomo, the level artist, crazy amount of job. Jonathan Foudral, who was the game designer of the Clockwork Soldier. Again, all those things need to work in conjunction. Otherwise, you do not have this very consistent game in the game that still doesn't feel like it's another game. To me, it is. I think main things are that team effort, being true to yourself and try to envision whether it's possible or not. And yes, indeed, luckily for this one, each time we saw something that felt impossible, someone found a way because we were stubborn. But yeah, it is definitely a difficult case to make, to have something that expensive in the game. But you know, I think I've actually heard a conference, I don't remember from whom it was. I think it was from the creative director of Rocksteady working on the Batman series that said something like, in your game, there will be some 8 out of 10 features when you evaluate. There will be some 7 out of 10 and some 3 out of 10, etc., etc. And his case was, and actually we did a version of that, like not exactly that, but we did a version of that on Deathloop, which actually allowed Deathloop to ship and to be a good game, I think, is you are very tempted to work on the 7s, you know, and actually the things that will be the 10 out of 10s, the 9 out of 10 features, they also deserve a lot of energy. And sometimes those are most, like basically people will remember your game by its heights.
Not the lows, yeah.
You see what I mean?
Yeah.
Not by the
mid-height.
okay things. The okay things, they are in every game, but the things that are the climaxes of your game, like be it a feature, a narrative beat, a level, an environment, you know, a piece of UI, it can be a lot of things, but we remember something brilliant about the game, and that's worth investing into. Like that is the thing that sometimes feels complicated because you're like, we have 10 things to do. Why should we spend time on that thing? And in those moments, it's important to say, actually, this is one thing that will be memorable. This is one thing that is completely overperforming, you know, compared to the rest. Maybe we've removed one of the 3 out of 10s features instead of bringing it to a 6. Maybe we stop investing in that 7 out of 10 feature, leave it as a 7 out of 10, just put the spotlight away from it by, you know, clever design and et cetera, et cetera. It's a balancing act for sure, but I'm glad that I play games every now and then where there is a set piece or a character or whatever that I'm like, yes, that's probably what happened here. Someone cared. They, you know, and they made the impossible happen, so.
Moving on to Deathloop, there's a couple of things that I find particularly interesting in that game, which I loved playing back in the day, and is that it makes a point of using as a game feature things that are usually external to games. Dying, saving and loading. I guess that's by feature, it's not by accident, but how did it came to that? Because it's a very peculiar and unique thing to the game and of its personality.
Yeah, well, I would say as soon as we decided to make a time loop game, which was something we decided not for this specific reason, but when we decided to make a time loop game, we knew that, oh, wait a minute, so in a time loop, death is part of the experience. It is part of the experience in any time loop movie. Even comedies like Groundhog Day, Palm Springs, Russian Dolls. Like even when it's not an action movie, death is part of the thing because death doesn't exist in a time loop. So it's fascinating to die. And as soon as we knew it was a time loop, again, remember the one sentence that derives the stylization, we knew we had to stylize death. Death couldn't be just a game over. Death couldn't be the end. Death couldn't be a failure to an extent. Because every death gets you closer to the objective. That's what happens in the one that is an action movie, actually Edge of Tomorrow, for instance. There is an amount of, from the get-go, and now the specifics of how it ended up as it is, it's just work and discussions and iteration. But from the start, you knew that you couldn't do something normal with death, that you couldn't do something normal with knowledge. Because in our games, we really try to synchronize as much as possible the experience of the protagonist and the experience of the player. And you couldn't pretend that the protagonist forgot what happened in the last loop if the player didn't forget about it. And you couldn't pretend that the protagonist knew something because knowledge became important if the player didn't knew something. So, for example, that's how we arrived to the cult forgets, and so there is an amnesia thing going on at the beginning of the game, which is not because it was an easy storytelling thing, because of course the trope of the amnesic protagonist exists a lot because it has a lot of advantages, but for us, a game about, you know, rival assassins locked in a time loop where we said knowledge is power, then you had to start from zero in terms of knowledge. So we didn't use the trope because it was a trope. We used it because it matched the experience we wanted to make. So again, it is a weird way to say, but at some point, the decisions you're making them in order to be true to the game itself, to the promise itself. You're not making them because it's good game design. You're not making them because it's a good idea. You're making them because it is what the game needs. This is what makes sense for this specific experience, this specific setting. And that's something that is, I think, very important. Like, you have to be true to the actual game, not just true to, I don't know, the market, the principles of game design in books, etc., etc. That's much less important than the game being true to itself, because people can tell when you're taking those shortcuts. And I think that pulls you out of the experience. It doesn't necessarily make bad games, but we notice. Players are smart. Yeah. They notice.
In immersive sense, emergent narrative, the stories that players create by themselves, are essential, giving the player the fantasy power of the power fantasy of being able to create their own story is essential. At the same time, your games are very well written and have a very strong narrative core to them. How do you bring those needs together so people have space and time to create their own stories, but they don't miss the beats of the actual story that you're bringing to the table?
There is various ways. I think one of the important thing is when you make that possibility space, it has to be what we call a story-rich world, which means a world that has so many stories in it, not only your story, but so many stories in it, so much, you know, narrative imbued everywhere, that any of your actions in it will make sense to a broader narrative, if you see what I mean. So what I mean by that is just the act of killing someone. There is that in not every, but a lot of video games, way too much video games, if you ask me. But the point is, the act of killing someone is not special anymore, you know, as a mechanic. However, in a world where, yada, 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 reasons, when you kill too many people, the plague spreads, and there is more rats, and more rats means more weepers, which are the people infected by the plague, and there is more guards and more security, and you make things harder for yourself. And on top of that, ultimately, you're giving the example to the whole empire that the way to solve problems is through violence and strength. Suddenly, killing one person feels that it has meaning, you know? And it has to be reinforced with the teams. On the complete other end of the spectrum, Deathloop, a world where death, as I mentioned, is a memory. It's just then killing one person means nothing, unless it is the one person that you care about, that the one person that is the most special, the most beautiful thing in the entire world, you know, and whether or not they die afterwards, that will have consequences. That one death is important. You see what I mean? So it is about the mechanic being coherent with the setting, with the stories, with all those stories, and it creates. Like, actually, there is a playtest that happened on Dishonored 1 that I think is a really good example of that. There is, in the second mission, so to speak, there is a manor, and in that manor, on the second or third floor, when you arrive, you sneak, and so the player was playing, he had been killing absolutely everyone on the way, silently. Not like a butcher, but with like silent cross. Actually, I was watching the playtest thinking, I'm going to nerf the crossbow. But he was really, rocking it, like the fantasy of the sniper, silent assassin. Good for you, And then he arrives, and a guard and a maid come next to each other on the path. So he couldn't move, and he wanted to stay in stealth, so he didn't kill them while they were seeing each other. So he waited for the conversation to play out. And the conversation was like that. The guard is like, hey, but the master told us not to go into his library and not touch to the books. And she's like, yes, but it's filthy and dirty, and and I had to do my job. And he's like, yeah, but he said exactly not to touch to that specific shelf, which of course is a hint that maybe you want to check the shelf. And the player was not really paying attention to that. He was just waiting for the thing to end. Like, he actually had the reticle on the head of the guard. He was just waiting for the maid to turn around to silent thing and then blink and probably assassinate the maid. He killed everyone, like, honestly. And then the conversation breaks by the maid saying, will it be like that when we'll be married? And then she walks away. And immediately the player is like, whoa, they are a couple? They are a young couple? They're going to get married? And immediately the player stopped. So they were like, okay, I cannot kill a couple.
I can't do this anymore.
I cannot kill lovers like that. That's a horrible way to die. So for the very first time of the game, of the entire play session, he snuck, he used the non-lethal takedown on one, then used a sleep dart on for the first time. He discovered the features on that moment, and then both of them are falling on the floor, and he's looking at them. It's like, I cannot let a couple sitting on the ground like this. So he picks up the body, puts it on the bed, go on, takes the other body, puts it on the bed next to each other, and then he says, loudly, playing, okay, they will wake up near each other at least. And then he closes the door.
So they have some intimacy.
Voila. And then he resumes killing absolutely everyone until the end of the playthrough. So that's the magic to me. That's the magic of emergent story. It wouldn't work if it was not this setting, this line of dialogue, these mechanics, this fantasy of being an assassin, and this possibility to kill or not kill being a choice. And I think that's a good encapsulation of how you do it. It's the mechanics, the possibility space, the narrative context that give weight to the actions, and then, yes, there is a mix of you making your own story, and it also being part of the narrative. There is nothing non-diegetic to this situation. Like Corvo, even revengeful, bloodthirsty Corvo, just lost his loved one in the intro of the game. The Imperatrice was killed. So him having compassion for young love makes sense.
Yes.
Yeah.
Something else that Deathloop did very well and that I find very interesting, for what it meant back then to the games industry, was representation. Having two black main characters is not common, actually. I said is not common yet. And that ties up with something you said last time we talked in the festival. I asked you if you could give some advice to young developers, and you said a lot of interesting things, and you ended up saying, don't let anyone tell you you don't belong here. I'd like to hear your thoughts about representation, because after all, it's all about that. Don't let anyone tell you you don't belong here. in games development, in life, in your story, in making an impression in the world. Is that something you set to do, or just happened, and then you pushed for it?
It just happens, but it doesn't happen by accident. It happens because you have, at least we try at Arkane to have a company culture that is listening to its community, that is listening to its developers, and that tries to, to bring joy and to offer, that's the interesting part. Like, honestly, it happened organically and naturally for Deathloop. I know the team working in Austin for Prey, the representation also happened kind of naturally. Dishonored 2, which is interesting because when we shipped Dishonored 2, I remember me being fed up by all the questions about how was it to make a game with a female protagonist? Like, that was like kind of special back then. And I remember saying, you know what, this is a bad question. Like, what the fuck is this question actually? It is the story of Emily. It is not a game about a girl.
Yeah.
What the hell, But fast forward, no one, in Deathloop you can also play as Juliana. No one said, how is it weird to make a game about a woman? Now people were asking about a black character, So it seems like this is going better, but I think I will steal that quote from Idris Elba, who was asked about him being in a role and being a black actor for playing a black character, and he said something like, until this question is no longer asked, we still have a problem.
Definitely, yes.
So, but is it a problem? Like, I mean, I can imagine some developers, some filmmakers, like, etc., making that the fight, like, what they really believe in and making that their fight. I would say that the interesting thing working at Arkane, it is not a fight. It is very natural, and for us, it's like we are glad that people see sometimes themselves in the game, but overall, we would just like the way it's natural for us to not even ask this question to be more widespread, because, and that's the other thing. I think the fact that it happened organically, that someday the art director comes and say, wait a minute, we had Colt like this, but here is the new design for Colt, and he's black, and we all like, is there a reason? He gives his reason, his truth, and I'm thinking about it, and I'm like, okay, I have another truth, and someone else say, okay, I see a reason which is this, and then it's like, okay, well, fine, why not, after all. So it was very, very natural, and in this case came from the artists, and I think it should always be easy. I mean, when we are looking at a movie, I don't think anymore anyone is like, the protagonist is black, or the protagonist is a woman, or the protagonist is LGBT. Like, no one. I mean, rarely people do still conscious. I think it's more and more natural in movies. Should be just as natural in games. I think it's going in the right direction, but again, until it's natural, and it's not a question anymore. I really respect. I know that some people in the industry really make it an effort to do conferences and talks and be advocates for representation and various types of representation. It's definitely something that I'm not doing, but I'm glad that because that's the thing, it happens organically, but when you do it, you have to do it well.
Yeah.
Because now some people are counting on you. You see what I mean? So when we did Emily, we had to do that well. When we did Colt and Juliana, we had to do that well. Now we're making Blade, we have to do that well. But it's not because it's a crusade, it's because it's making genuine characters. You know, there is, while I'm still in quotes, there was this quote there was an interview of, George Martin, who wrote Game of Thrones, Song and Ice and Fire, and someone asked, hey, you have a lot of great women in your books. How do you go about writing a great woman? And he answered something like, well, I've always thought of women as people, so I write interesting people in my books. Yes. And that was like a slap in a way to, this assumption that this is different. Being genuine with your work, being genuine with your story, your characters, that's how you get good representation. I don't think it's by, if you set it out as a goal, it should be natural. If you did not set it as a goal, it still has to feel natural.
Yeah.
Because, again, people.
Yeah. I've got a final question. Let's end on an inspiring note. This is a crowd of indie developers, mostly. You're not an indie developer now. If you were, how would you try to, how would you approach your game? How would you tell them, you know what, if I were an indie, I would be trying to do this. That's a tough one.
I would resist. Okay, this is very personal, so don't take that as a. But I would resist trying to make my game the best version of something that already exists, unless I have an excellent angle, a team with an expertise on this. Like, I need to have at least one undeniable asset if I'm going to do what others have done and be the best. Like, if I'm going to make a roguelite like Hades, like, first of all, I would never do that, because that's scary as fuck.
It's done already, yes.
Yeah, but if I did, it would be because I have someone in my team that is an expert, that is there would be a material reason why I would chase that dragon, because it's a dragon. If I don't have those conditions, then I would try to do something unique, something original, something that matters for me. Like, basically, don't do what AAA games do, which is have 3 or 4 genres, and so don't make a farming game if you can. Don't make a roguelite with a stylized art style and great narrative each time you die. Like that someone did that well. I don't say don't do it ever. I said have a material reason why you would do that and not something that is yours, something that is original, something no one has done in a long time, for instance. Like, why not? Like, so yeah, it's the best version of something that no one has been doing for 20 years, then hell, yeah, go for it, man. But that's what I would avoid. I would hope that the indie developers don't make the exact same mistakes as the AAA industry, which is making the same game over and over, and just slightly better, slightly worse, slightly better, slightly worse, because as we can see, it is very bloody. It's a bloodbath when when we are all doing the same thing, but there is 3 leaders in the industry of that genre. Like, if I was doing a roguelite, for instance, because I would definitely look at Silksong and look at Hades and look at the 3 or 4 more successful ones like that, and say, how can we make something that is absolutely not like that? Like, what is the angle that we can bring with my small team, the freedom that we have, the creativity that we have to not be held by a big company or the market. Like, basically, don't try to make the best vanilla ice cream. Bring us, artichoke ice cream. And be the best, because you can be the best artichoke ice cream in the world right now, if you put your mind to it. So that would be the main advice to me for indie developers. Like, give me things that I have never played. Like, give me the Dave, the Divers of the world. Give me the the cocoons of the world. Like, give me something I have not played, rather than the best version that someone has already done, unless you have a really good angle.
Okay, guys. Thank you very much again for being here. We're giving you an honorary award today. Actually, a bit later. Don't go anywhere. Because of your outstanding career and achievements and contributions to the story of this medium that we love so much, that we believe that is much more than just sitting in front of a TV to spend some time. We believe there's some depth to it, that is something that can touch your soul and change your life for the better, hopefully. So it's been a pleasure and an honor to sit down here to talk with you. And don't go anywhere you either, because we are about to start the Titanium Awards, and we'll have the opportunity to hand your award to you and hear your words about it. Please put your hands together for Dinga Bakaba.